Good evening. You are all welcome to day 7 of our training program. Dr. Gipti Boatin will continue on the Biorisk that she started yesterday. I hope the rest that have not joined will join soon. Dr. Gipti Boatin, please, are you ready?
Yes. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's session.
Thank you.
Let me share my slide. Hello, please can my slide be seen?
Yes.
Okay. So, good evening once again. This evening we are supposed to continue with ethics and then biorisk management. But this can be found under the session of biorisk assessment or risk assessment. So we will talk about risk assessment, then we would capture the ethics in there for all of us to understand and then appreciate. But if we will recall, yesterday we started with the introduction of biorisk management, where we talked about what biorisk is, the fact that it is the risk associated with biological materials, the key principles that we need to use to address the issue, the strategies which included the risk assessment, mitigation, and performance. And as we talked, we also moved to talk about the levels of lab and the fact that each of these levels you can only work in these levels with the associated organisms if you have done effective risk assessment. So we want to continue with that. So at the end, we want to understand the concept of risk management. We want to know the importance, the steps involved. Then we'll talk about the ethics of biorisk management. For risk, now it is becoming more diverse. First, we will restrict ourselves to a few. But we should know that risk exists beyond pathogens. But we are just interested in the pathogen part. But this is additional information I want you to know, that now risk is going beyond biorisk. It is also involved in life science, where there's a lot of research. The technologies we are developing are also coming with risk. Traditional laboratories, it goes beyond any of us. Therefore, rapid pace of advance in life, size, coverages, and all of that also have caused us to know that risk is advancing. And therefore, there's a need for responsible governance mechanism systems to achieve this. Managing risk requires an organizational culture. Yesterday we talked about that. It's everybody's business. It needs a holistic assessment where we talk about the biosafety, biosecurity, biocontainment of all the things we deal with in the lab. In addition to conducting life science, we are also responsible to comply with relevant laws. And that is where our ethics and things will come in. The values and beliefs that we have will come in. And then research and technologies have also have different benefits of this we are talking about. Sometimes we set out to do research, but then in the end, some people also have an unintentional use. And therefore we are faced with what we call the dual use dilemma. And so just managing risk alone is not enough. We need a governance part where the dual use research will come to play. But we are interested in the first two, the biorisk part, the biosafety, biosecurity. But you should know that Now there's dual use research, where we set out to do research to benefit us in terms of methods and information generation, knowledge, and all of that. But then some people have other intended use, and all these raises risk, and then we need to work on that. So then what is biorisk assessment? We are talking about risk assessment. And when we talk about risk assessment, for the benefit of what we did yesterday, we are interested in the biorisk. So both biosafety risk and biosecurity risk assessment. And for here, it is a systematic way, a systematic process underlined. It is not haphazard. You just have to be systematically evaluating and quantifying all the potential risks that are associated with the work we do, the biological agents. The importance for doing risk assessment cannot be overemphasized. It is to make sure that the environment and the public, including yourself, we are all safe. According to ISO 15190, it defines risk assessment as overall processing to analyzing risk and then evaluating it. WHO manual also defines risk assessment as a systematic process, and I like that definition. It is a systematic process where you are gathering information. We'll go into the details. You are evaluating the likelihood and consequence. And this one, when we go further, you realize that it has to do with what? Risk. Then you determine the appropriate control measures to reduce the risk or to accept the risk. So that is what the WHO says. The AU Biosafety Biosecurity Legal Framework also says that it is a systematic way. So you realize that in all of that, we are talking about systematic. The fact that you need to gather information, the fact that you need to evaluate that information, determine the hazards, the risk, and whether it is acceptable to continue your work or not is what we are talking about. I'll reduce when you get the slide, some of these things are definitions. I'll still continue. But what I want us to know, as I have said, when we talk about risk assessment, we are interested in both biosecurity risk and biosafety risk. And then definitions are there. So when you assess the risks, that has to do with, let me go back to the safety part. That has to do with the safety issues, the safety risk. Then you're talking about biosafety risk assessment. So it is also systematic, where you identify the safety risk. Then when you identify the security risk, and then you determine whether you should prevent people or the vulnerable, then we are talking about biosecurity risk assessment. All these are definitions. So why do we do biorisk assessment? I think I gave the broad way: to protect the human beings, environment, prevent loss and misuse of biological materials, comply with regulations. We will come to see that as part of our ISO 15189, the 2022, we are supposed to do a risk assessment. And majority of the work we are doing now, or the ISO, is based on risk assessment. So now they've even reduced it from our CAPA, where we do corrective actions and things, to more of risk assessment. In pharmaceutical companies, they also do risk assessment. That is why we are able to take drugs and then we are fine. Agric also do risk assessments of their livestock. The food companies, the environmental, public health agencies, we all do risk assessments. It is also important to know that during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, a lot of risk assessments were done, and therefore we're able to determine what types of PPEs we should wear, which level of labs we should work in. Same with COVID. It was through risk assessment that we were able to know that it is not only level 3 lab that can test, a level 2 lab can also do that. So risk assessment really is important. It's in all our diverse of way. And in one of our trainings, somebody said, even in our marriages, we need to do risk assessment. But when do we perform risk assessments? Anytime you have a new infectious agent. So if I bring you to my lab, when we had COVID, it wasn't an organism or a disease that we were working with initially. So we needed to assess the risk of that organism coming into our lab. So we needed to look at the samples, where we do the work, do we have what it takes, the equipment to protect us, the PPEs, the level of the lab, and all of that. It was after that assessment, and then we realized that there are risks associated with it, but is it acceptable or not acceptable? We did that before we said we are going to do that. Also, when you have different procedures and practices, it is important to assess the risk, but some procedures are prone to more risk than others. When you have a new equipment, you may be working with one particular equipment for a particular diagnosis. As you change that equipment, you need to assess the risk that goes with it. Personnel, you need to assess when you have different personnel. Then changes in manufacturer or supplier. When you have advanced, sometimes some of the methods we are using, they are scientific knowledge that are advanced. When we are introducing them, anytime you do relocation or renovation, you have to assess your risk. So all these are areas that treat us to do risk assessment. So you need to understand what is risk, and we won't belabor this one. This one, everybody knows. It is the likelihood and the consequences. So anytime you are exposed to any of these hazards, the likelihood that that hazard, you'll be exposed to it, and then the consequences that comes with it. In mathematical terms, we see that it is a function of risk is a function of likelihood and what consequence. And so we define risk as the likelihood or the consequences that comes with a hazard or threat. So we talk about hazards when you are dealing with biosafety, and you talk about threats when you are dealing with biosecurity. Let's move on with this. So now we know what is risk. We want to conduct risk assessment. What are the processes? The first step is to make sure that you're identifying and evaluating. We've talked about this several times since yesterday. Then you have to make sure that you have put in control measures. And then there's a performance. So let's take them one by one and then look at it. Sorry. So this diagram is coming from the WHO manual, where it defines risk assessment as you gather information, you evaluate the risk. So in the gathering of information, what it means is that you need to know all that it is about the activities that you are going to perform, as I talked about yesterday, from the pre-analytical to post. What are these activities? What are the issues around it? What kind of work are you going to do? The human beings you are going to use. You are gathering information about all of these. And then you have to identify the risk. So then you will go to the second step, where you are going to evaluate that step. But before we go that, there are other people who also would define the risk, the process. If you talk about Kaplan and then Garrick, they say that if you're assessing risk, you need to know what can go wrong as you are working. How likely is that thing going to happen? How likely can you see it coming? And then what will be the consequences? Then when you come to the ISO, it is also like the WHO one. It says that you have to identify, you have to do risk characterization, you have to do risk evaluation, you mitigate, you perform. So what are these steps? For the gathering of information or for the identification, according to the ISO 35109, it says that biorisk-related hazards and threats associated with the work we do should be identified and documented. And our ISO 15189 is in relation to some of these things. So it says you shall identify and document. So every lab is supposed to identify and document all our hazards and threats that we have in our labs. The first stage is to make sure that you involve everyone. This is a teamwork. It is not something that you alone will stay in your office or in your corner and say, I want to do this identification. Some of the things might not even come into your knowledge. So at the organizational level, everybody is supposed to be part. Again, it says you have to determine the hazard, the threats that could produce negative outcome. So now we are looking at, you have the hazard. Now you are looking at the risk. The negative outcome will be the risk. So what are the consequences if you identify those hazards? You need to have a comprehensive understanding of the hazards and threats you are going to identify, because that will help you to know whether it is going to be risky or not. These should be identified, and then if they cause harm to, you have to know whether it is to human beings, plants, or to the environment. Then the inherent characteristics of the hazards, you need to document them once you see them. So if you go to the CDC document, it tells you that you identify the hazards and then the risks that are associated with it. So if you look at sharps are hazards. What are the risks that you are likely to get a needle prick? If you have chemicals, what are the risks associated? So these are the things that you have to do at this stage of hazard identification. The next step says that you need some document to put the characterization and evaluation together. And so the ISO says that the organization shall, it's a shall, so it means it is a must. You have to ensure that you have suitable methodologies for assessing these and prioritizing them. So as you identify your hazards and your risks, you need to prioritize and then assess them. And so you have to take account of the activities, the protocols, all the information that are unique to do this work. And then you have to have scenarios or activities that could produce a negative effect in your lab. All these I've talked about it, but what you should know is that when you are doing the evaluation, it can be done by qualitative, semi-quantitative, or quantitative to be able to do this kind of evaluation, where you are going to say that the risk is high, it is low, it is moderate. You need to know that it can be done qualitatively or semi-quantitative. So the evaluation, it is a process that you determine, and it is subjective. Whether the risk is high, it is low, as I've said, the method, and whether it is acceptable. If it is acceptable, you proceed with your work. If it is not, then you need to put in an implementation to reduce the risk, and then if you reduce and it is acceptable, you continue. So that is what risk evaluation is all about. And normally it starts from the gathering of the information. It is when you have gathered that you know that the goal for this evaluation step is to determine the likelihood, that is the risk of the exposure, and then the consequences. So in case you have identified that you have sharps, what will be the likelihood? And then if you get a needle prick, is it going to be high? The consequences, would it be high or low? You have to determine it based on all the things that you have gathered, whether they are available, prophylaxis, and all of that. Then you have to make sure that you establish how the likelihood that the risk can contribute to initial risk, or whether the risk is acceptable or not, as I have said. And so we use the risk assessment matrix. This one is the qualitative way, where you put your consequences on the y-axis, and then you would define all your hazards or your exposures. Then you match it with the likelihood. Is it going to be high or low? Anywhere they cross, whether if it's in a green area, it is a very low risk. If it is high, red area, it is very high. Now that you have known whether the risk is high, low, you need to determine the acceptable rate. How do you do that? You have to bear in mind that risk acceptance is based on where you are, the culture, the experiment, the resources you have, the management, the event that has happened. If you go to Apiati and then you bring that explosive thing that they saw there, anywhere close to their village, no matter how well you put in mechanism, because of their experience, they won't accept for that chemical to come close them. So acceptance of a risk depends on all of this. There is no systematic way, let me stress here, of evaluating this, but you need to that the acceptability is about balance between conducting the work and ensuring that people are safe, the community is safe. So acceptability of a risk, there's no systematic way of determining that. But then you want to do the work. You are supposed to save the lives of the people through the testing you are doing. You have to balance that between when the organism is released into the community to how it is going to affect them. But you always have to note that the community's way of accepting your risk is very, very high. No matter how good or how well whatever you're going to do in your lab is, if the community says no, you need to consider that and work with them to come to an acceptable level so that you can work. So we should all know that risk can never be completely eliminated unless you don't want to work. When you don't want to work, then there's no risk. But so far as we are all going to be testing, there is risk. Therefore, we need to determine the initial or the residual, what we call the acceptable risk, or the unacceptable one. And then all of this will be part of our evaluation process. So now you have gathered the information. That is, you have identified your hazards, the risk. You have done your assessment you have done your evaluation where you have determined that the risk is acceptable, it is not acceptable. Now, if it is not acceptable, what are some of the control measures that you put in place? Or what are some of the control measures after the evaluation that can bring the risk to a level that everybody would accept? So this is what we call the risk mitigation. How the system will measure the effectiveness of the control measures you are putting in place. And so the standard says that the biorisk assessment shall determine the most appropriate control. And then when you do that, how this control becomes effective. So normally for control measures, it says that it shall be designated to eliminate or mitigate. So any of this is fine. But as I said, we are almost always not able to do complete elimination. These are all words which when you get, you can read so that we can progress. And these are all coming from the ISO. So what are some of the control measures that we can identify and put in place? It includes 5 major ways, and depending on the kind of document or the resource material you are using, the elimination and the substitution can be separated. So you have the elimination or substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, practices and procedures, and then PPAs. So after you have done your evaluation where you have identified the consequences and then the likelihood, you use the same thing to determine the control measures. So if you look at the diagram on my left, so if you do your assessment by using the metrics and you fall within the green zone, that is the zone that you can decide that you need core requirement to control. If you move into the yellow zone, you have to heighten your control measures. And then if you move into the red zone, you need a maximum containment to be able to work with that kind of risk that you have identified. So let's understand what elimination or substitution is. It is removing or substituting the hazard you have identified. So you want to work with HIV. The system is such that you can't work with it, but you still want to go ahead and work. How do you eliminate the hazard of getting HIV infection? Is it that you can have a system where you can kill the HIV virus and still be able to work? or you attenuate it and then you work with it. That will become the substitution. For the engineering controls, you have TB. You are going to do cultures. You have to ask yourself, do I have the engineering controls? And this will include the equipment, the PPEs we would use. All of these are engineering. Sorry, did I say PPEs? No. The equipment, the facility itself, where the design of your lab, the environment, all of these things will help you to be able to control the design. The other way is the administrative control. You all realize that when we had COVID, to be able to reduce the risk, we had to do some people were not coming to the office. Some would also run in shifts. Some labs that were not doing shifts had to do that. There were some policies that were put in place on what to do, what not to do, how to collect samples. Trainings were done. All of these will fall under administrative controls. That will help us to be able to reduce the risk that comes with the work we do. Then the practices and then the procedures. These will be our SOPs, our all the things that we do through our practices and then our procedures. Then the last is the PPEs, where we would use to control risk. But what you should note is that these control measures are in hierarchical way, and we'll come to that. They all have advantages and disadvantages. So when you get the slides, you would go through it to see how best you can use each of them. So it is not a one-fit-size, or it depends on what you are doing and how you're going to control it. So with this hierarchical way of controlling, you should know that it moves from the most effective is the elimination. And as I said, you are physically removing the hazard. So that it means that you are not going to do the work. And the least of it is the PPEs. What you should know that PPE doesn't protect any other person, but except the one who is working. So that is why it is the least of the controls. If we come into the using car and a motorbike, the engineering controls will be how the car is designed to reduce the risk of accidents. But when you are using a motorbike, how they design the motorbike will not help you unless you have put on your PPEs. So that is what we are talking about. Now you have done your identification, you have done the evaluation, you have put in the control measures. You have to make sure that you are evaluating these control measures to see that your system is still working. So how are you going to do that monitoring? What needs to be monitored? If you have put in PPE as a control measures, are people wearing them? Are people wearing and still getting infection? The methods that you are going to use to do the evaluation, you need to know. When you want to do this monitoring to assess the performance of whatever you have put in place, and then when the results are going to be used, you should know that this performance evaluation can be achieved through our internal audit, and it is from our ISO 15189. So our management reviews can also help us achieve this kind of evaluation, where you are going to assess whether you're managing your risk or not. And so you can discuss these things at management review meetings from the report that you get. You should also know that it is a SHA. So we always have to make sure that there's a performance evaluation of the risk assessment that we do. So it is compulsory. And the method you are going to use, you can use a quantitative or semi-quantitative or qualitative methods. In any of this, it has to be documented, and the results has to be used to check the system. So after evaluation, if your control measures are not working, it means that you need to start the assessment again. And so for risk assessment, it is not a one-time job. It is a continual thing that has to always be done. So this is a summary of what we are talking about: identifying the risk, doing evaluation, putting in mitigation, and then doing performance review. So that is risk assessment. But we should note that risk assessment is influenced by other factors. Factors by like the nature of the hazard, the level of the exposure, who is involved, how vulnerable they are, the regulatory requirements that you have also affect the risk assessment that you can do. Then the chain of infection also affects the way we do risk assessment. Having said this nicely, there are challenges that comes with it. Sometimes to gather the information, you realize that the data is very, very limited. So if you agree, when we had COVID, to know whether which lab can do it or not, the disease had to progress for some time before assessment could be done to gather information on the kind of organism it was, how infectious it is, and all of that. Initially, there were limited data. And so it became difficult for them to do a proper risk assessment. But as the disease progressed, we were able to do that. There are also complex interactions among multiple hazards. Sometimes it's not only one hazard you are dealing with. And then to be able to manage all of them is not. The issue of subjectivity in estimating risk becomes difficult because what will become as a risk tolerant in one lab will be rejected in another. And so this subjectivity is very, very difficult in the evaluation phase of the assessment. Then when conditions changes and then the uncertainties comes in, all these things are challenges. And so we need to take it into mind. That will guide us to do a proper risk assessment. So we should know that once you have done risk assessment, it comes with this risk acceptability as we have talked. And so then the ethics of biorisk will come in. Here we are looking at the fact that we said some risks should be accepted, some risks should not be. And so you're asking yourself, how safe is safe enough for me to accept this risk? How secure is this secure enough? Are these measures that we have put in place, are they so robust that I have to accept that risk they are talking about? And so here ethics will come in. It is the ethics that will address the principle of moral guide. Some people are more, they accept risk. The rationale of choice of accepting no risk or taking a risk or risk exposure will depend on the risk ethics that we are going to talk about. And for this, we need to also take into consideration the risk perception. It also affects our risk assessment and then our risk ethics. The individual factors such as knowledge. The knowledge one have on a particular disease affects the way or the perception of how they will accept a particular risk, and for that matter, risk assessment. The demographic variables, where you are. I use Apiati as the example. If you should bring any chemical close to them, whether even if it is kerosene, and then they perceive it as the chemical that blasted the area, it will not. So that perception is there. Personality aspects. Some are more tolerant to risk than others. All these affect the way we perceive assessment. Familiarity and then control. Some of us, when we are taking samples, say African germs, they don't kill. So we are used to not even wearing PPEs. And so when it becomes compulsory that you should wear PPE in collecting samples, because you are so familiar with the system, it becomes difficult for you to comply. All these things affect the way we assess our risk. The mental and physical health, and then stress. Other factors or perceptions include the context, the culture, which I've discussed, the availability of alternative, the political context, economic factors, depending on whether you have money. Sometimes maybe you need this particular PPE to work with, depending on the money available. Somebody will tell you that, oh, even if you don't wear PPE, we need to accept the risk that's with it. And then recent events, I've discussed that. Also with the characteristics of the risk, the likelihood, the consequence, historical information, professional judgment, the cost-benefit analysis that you do. Sometimes if you look at the money that is coming with the project and the risk that is associated, you tell your superiors that, oh, the risk is small. For all you know, it is even high. Then the media information. Sometimes some of the media men, they can blind the issue such that. I remember when we wanted to do the malaria vaccine. You realize the trials, how the media was able to skew the whole conversation, and then we were suffering. But in all of this, to be able to take all these perceptions and everything down, we need to really engage. You have to include the cost and benefit analysis, and everybody or every opinion matters. How you are going to communicate to all the relevant groups, irrespective of who the person is. So you need to identify all your stakeholders in the lab, including our cleaners. They are the least people that we consider. Meanwhile, they are the ones that handle a lot of our waste for us. And then you have to allow for free discussions, and you have to have open-minded people so that you can accept and disagree. You have to always make sure that you reach a consensus. And then whatever that you agree on after the assessment, you have to have a proper communication plan, and it has to be communicated to everyone. So then it comes to what we are still talking about the ethics and then risk acceptability. What we call the moral hazards against the selection hazards. When we say moral hazards, it refers to some people, they just can take more risk behavior because sometimes they think they are insulated. So they take more risk because the consequences of their actions doesn't affect them. As again, the adverse selection also occurs when one party has more information than the other and therefore uses that information to make a choice that will benefit him. As I said, sometimes there are some projects we want to do, there are some money associated with it. Because of that information, we care very little about the risk that comes with it. And therefore, with this information, one would want to do the project at all costs, no matter what the risk associated with it is. So for moral hazards in biorisk assessment, the possibility that people can change their behavior in ways that it can increase the risk of the event occurring after they have taken the steps to mitigate. So some people, after we have put in control measures, they care very little. They would still want to go ahead and then do that. So for example, if researchers believe that safety protocols would always protect them from harm, they might be less inclined to strictly adhere to and establish that because of the knowledge they have, they would want to do that. For the adverse selection, it could occur if the individuals are not transparent. Sometimes you hide the information from your colleagues about the health status. So some of us also, we have situations that whatever work we are going to do would affect us. But because of the benefit that is coming with it, we try to want to hide that information so that we can still would go ahead and then we'll have effects on our health. So that is the adverse selection. So in all of this, how do you mitigate the moral hazard? You have to be transparent. You have to be accountable. And that is where the ethics comes in. In trying to manage our risk in the lab, we need to be transparent. You don't hide things from each other because then you will not be able to handle the issues well. We have to be accountable. We have to provide incentives for good safety. This one will encourage people to do or practice safety well. We have to put in strong regulations. Strong regulations. There's the need for training and awareness. Sometimes people are doing what they do not because they want to do that, but they are not aware of the risk that comes with it. Especially with our cleaners, I always stress on that. They do some of the things they do because they don't have the understanding. Then the need for M&E, regular assessment, you need to, then continuous improvement. Once we're able to do this, we will mitigate this ethics that comes with it. So in concluding, the key point I want us to talk about is that risk assessment evaluates potential hazards and their associated risk. It is crucial for accident prevention and informed decision making. So you can't decide to work on any organism in your lab if you haven't done risk assessment. Any method you want to introduce, if you haven't done risk assessment, The ones we are working on that we haven't done, we can start from today. The process involves hazard identification, risk estimation, evaluation, mitigation, and then performance. And there are ethical implications for determining acceptability. So you don't just decide that because I am here, I want to accept it, but it is a collective way of accepting a risk, and therefore the ethical implications have to be applied. These are documents that you can follow on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gifty. PRO, are you around? Okay. Is there any question? Okay, Francis, you have the floor.
All right, thank you so much, Reverend. And I thank you, Dr. Gifty, for your wonderful presentation. So my question to Doctor is that when you talk about identifying risk in terms of the processes and the procedures we do in our laboratories, and then the fact that we need to determine the risk at our various, facilities, don't you think that will be problematic? Because, for example, we are doing virtually the same thing from US to Djibouti, Ghana to Azerbaijan. If it is about analysis of, let's say, blood film for MPs, it's not the same procedure. For example, if you are using the manual method or if it is automation, why wouldn't we have a universal kind of guide so that everybody will adopt it in your own language to guide us in the process? And who is responsible for such a thing? Is it WHO or the European Union or the Americans, or we the blacks should take our destiny into our own hands? That's my first question. The second one has to do with, if you look at, I think that one will go to buttress that point. If you look at an aeroplane, irrespective of whether you are a poor country or you are a developed country, there are specifications so that people who will be boarding that flight will have a safe flight. So why can't we have a universal method for identifying risk and then performing these risks as assessment as a laboratory? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm happy with where you brought in the aeroplane. It is the same thing that we are talking about. It is the same thing. These are standards that affect all of us. But if you look at the processes I've gone through, identifying that you have sharps as a hazard in your lab and what will come with the risk that is coming with it will depend on the structures you have. And so that is where the difference comes in. It is the same standards, but then depending on where you are, the needle, what are you going to do with the needle? It is at that point, the activity that you are going to use, that would also change. We are talking about blood films. The method is the same. So if you are using the same procedure, it's the same that an American lab would do. So for such places, after going through this method, and then they realize that to mitigate the risk that comes with maybe the slide, the collection of the blood, the pricking, and all of that, they make sure they put in control measures that resolve these issues. It is our part of the lab of the world that we don't take some of these things serious, and so we make it look as if that you can do it anyhow. You can't do it anyhow. The standards are the same, but it is the measures you put in that would tell you, can I continue the work? Can I continue? Can I not continue? But for us, even when the measures are not good enough and the risk is high, we will continue because we don't have any option. That is the only difference. So please don't let us think that these are just Africans are left. We are left to our fate because we are not enforcing our laws. We are not enforcing the things that we have to do. Like yesterday we said, somebody was asking me whether at a level 1 lab is collecting blood samples. Meanwhile, that lab is supposed to be 2 because that's where he or she is. But she was asking whether, from the discussions that went on, she realized that her lab cannot be a level 2, so on offer go to 1. So then as the 1, but that is not what it's supposed to be. So it is just because you are not following the guideline. Thank you.
Okay, Michael Bakwasari, kindly ask your questions.
Yeah, hello?
Hello.
Yeah, Doc, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to contribute to the very question that Dr. Kwashi just asked. I mean, what Doc has done is to give us, if you like, the template, the standard. But then meeting the standard, sometimes depending on the environment that you are in, the resources available, even the skill sets of the individuals over there. Once you do the risk analysis, there's a possibility that you may want to vary some of those procedures. So, for example, if you want to test for, let's say, HIV, and you find an assay that can easily use a specimen such as, let's say, saliva, I mean, that makes it easier. And also the threat that it even poses to your client is quite different in this case, because you just swab the mouth or use the saliva, and then you are good to go. At the end of the day, you've been able to achieve the target for which maybe somebody will sit somewhere and use, let's say, whole blood. But in the end, the safety of your patient is also guaranteed. And sometimes it might also even guarantee the safety of the individual and makes it simpler. So the guidelines the standards are there, but it's left to you to look at what you have at your disposal. And then you look into it and see where you can necessarily make some changes, because that's what the standard is there. So I think in UCC, there's this sculpture. There's a woman that is actually breastfeeding a baby. And when you go there, you see that the baby is actually struggling from the back. So the standard is there. It's up to you to do the right thing in order to meet it. So I think Doc has said it all. So Dr. Kwachi, they are there for us, but we would have to also look at our own situation and then make it suit the purpose for which we have designed them. Thank you.
Thank
Doc,
you
I'm
very
done.
much. Thank you, Michael, for your insightful contribution. Since we started, you have been with us and have been contributing. We are grateful for your support. Stella, kindly unmute and ask your question.
Okay. Good evening. This is not a question, but I want us to go back to yesterday. I asked a question thinking that my lab is in level 1 because of the vaccination, but I realized that my lab is in level 2. I only got confused when, because we don't run measles tests and all that, we take the sample out. So I thought I was in level 1. So why wouldn't I be vaccinated? But later on, when it went back to the slides, then I realized that it was just a teaching lab for maybe JSS, SS, something like that. So that's what I want to correct there. I'm not in level 1 lab, but I'm in level 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stella. So you have to go and look for the vaccination, as was contributed by Dyron yesterday. Our disease, depending on where you are in Greater Accra. So you can visit your regional or your district management sessions. They have all these vaccines available, and they are giving it to babies. So if you go, your lab managers can arrange for you. That is what we did in the lab. We went to the EPI, arranged for all the staff, and then they came to do that for us. So it is not a one-man show. It is the responsibility of the employer to see to it that these vaccinations are done. So it's not an individual affair. So managers here, we need to collaborate with the vaccination sessions in our districts and municipals to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Adejesi, are you with us?
Yeah.
All right. Kindly continue, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. So just a couple of questions that have come up, and I would like to read them. When it comes to my director, who are you to moderate? But if you say so, why not? Dr. Gifty, thank you very much for the great contribution from yesterday and today.
So, Dr. Adejesi, it's a long time.
Yeah, very long time. Those of us in the village, we've been neglected. Boss, so Ayim Samuel is asking, how does the administrative control help in risk management? That is solo. If you've gone through those ones already, then I can stop it up. So, Dr. Martin.
Yes, I should go. Have
you already looked at those ones?
You said we have already looked at it, but the person still wants to know. So let's go back to the slide where we have the definitions. So these are directions that comes. Let me go to it proper. So these are the policies administratively, as I gave an example during COVID. Some labs were not running, were running 24 hours. Some of you, to depend on the work you were doing, were asked to stay home. So the policies, the standards, the guidelines, all these things help us as administratively. So I remember during our place, those who were not doing much of COVID work and the workload had come down, we were not forcing them, like the so administratively, we put in some policies, we put in some guidelines in terms of testing. What are the guidelines saying that will help you to reduce that risk? So if it is a PPE that we are all supposed to wear, the policy is that everybody should put on PPE. So it has to be stated, it has to be documented. The guideline says that before you come to the lab, before you work in our lab administratively, to reduce the risk of you getting all the vaccine preventable diseases, you have to be vaccinated. It is a guideline, it is a policy. So this is the administrative control that we are talking about. Things that it comes from the administration that helps us to reduce the risk. Again, our standards and our guidelines in the lab says that anytime that we get a new organism, if anybody wants us to test, we need to assess the risk. So it is a policy. We have to do that. So if I come and you're testing for a new organism in the lab, I would first go to the safety officer. Where is the assessment? And it has to be done with me, together with everybody who is involved in the testing. So these are the things we are talking about administratively. Even sometimes how to even change some of the workers. Sometimes you realize that you are conducting TB in your lab. Somebody is more prone to getting the TB than others. These are guidelines we put in place, or policies that we put in place. If we know your baseline serum, there are certain test we are not supposed to allow you to do because we know how prone you are. And these are the administrative issues we are talking about. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. So I think that is the other one is coming from a colleague who is, I don't know if it's a lamentation, but let me ask, how do you uphold IPC as a poor middle income country where everybody knows what is right, but nobody has money to do or sustain the right?
So
I don't
Dr.
know if
Diggins, you have answered it for me. You said it's a lamentation, so we'll take it like that. So, colleagues, we have done so many things and we have accepted them as the norm. We can unlearn some of the things we are doing. Sometimes we make it so difficult and think that maybe I'm shaper and it doesn't affect me. We can make a change. I will always remember and call and mention Mrs. Bequeen's name. When I joined the reference lab, there was a day we didn't have gloves. This woman says that, hell no, we should all go home. Without gloves, we can't work. And truly, it was communicated to the next level. Within 3 hours, they had gotten us boxes of gloves for us to, because at the time we were the ones screening for all the HIV cases for blood bank. So if you don't work a day, they are in trouble. So these are some of the things that we can gradually. Some of these things, you do it collectively. It is a safety issue, but there are times that when we want to implement some of these things, as you are not using the gloves, will be organized for sample this are used to. Or for sample now without gloves, or you're fine. So it doesn't even see the need and then what you're talking about. So these are practices that we need to, together as colleagues, we have to work on. It is not too late. We can start gradual. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, hello. Dr. Boating.
Hello, I'm here.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you very much. But I think what I just want to say is that as much as we wouldn't get all the sophisticated things to put in place, all the control measures that are required, the ones that are within our control, let's ensure we can get it done. It's so common now to get people, irrespective of where they sit in the lab, to be using their phones. This same phone will not even be disinfected, but they will be carried home. You don't know what you are carrying home. That one doesn't need a matter of, is it low, middle income country, whatever. It's about simple adherence to policy structures and those control measures. So we may not get all the biosafety cabinets that are required. We may not have all the policies adopted for use, but the ones that basically and fundamentally we know we have to put in place, we have to stick to it. Even that is becoming a challenge. So it's not about resources, but it's about respecting what has been put in place and what can protect us and our families. So I think we just have to take note of that. Okay, so I'm not getting any further questions except that people are still expressing their appreciation. One I want to mention is from Elizabeth Sovo, who is saying thank you. That's my in charge, so at least I have the opportunity to bias. She's my in charge from St. Patrick's Hospital. Yeah, so she says thank you, Dr. Boateng. And I have to say that. So I think the other ones are fine. On YouTube, I'm not getting any questions coming up. So, okay, Dr. Francis Kwachentwi, is it the old hand or you have a new one?
Yeah, I think this is the right hand. The first one was the left hand.
Oh, okay, all right. Then you can ask your question.
So Dr. Gifty, I think that from the submission from Dr. Edijesi, don't you think that as leaders in our various laboratories, we are probably failing ourselves. Because, for example, the issue of maybe eating in the lab, drinking in the lab, using phones in the labs, some of these things are purely leadership roles that we are supposed to play. So that when persons are not wearing gloves, you document it, you query them through maybe telling them that you are doing it to save them. Don't you think if we start doing some of these things, we can change with time?
Yes, so I'm happy that you have said it. So sometimes when we have some of these discussions and then we see it as somebody's problem, somebody's responsibility, and we sit on the fence, that is where we don't make any change. But when you put yourself in that today I have heard this, the change starts with me. It might not be your head of a lab, but you, the one who have heard it, in your own small way, you are starting all the safety issues with you. Then you progress to the others. Once they see that change in you, when you also talk, if you are the type who would want to take samples without wearing gloves, then all of a sudden everybody sees that you are wearing. You use your phone anywhere, but all of a sudden you have stopped. Then when you also tell others, then they will follow. Again, if you listen to the discussions that we talked about in terms of the risk assessment, for people to do it very well, the perception comes in. And so education is important. Communication is important. And today we are doing some of this education. As I said, safety is not the responsibility of one person. It's the responsibility of all. But it takes one person to lead, to push that agenda. But then everybody is supposed to be there. So I don't want us to push it to leaders. I don't want us to push it to, but from us. So in my lab, no matter all the measures I'll put in there, if the people don't understand the importance of what we are talking about, they will not follow. And so to make it more effective, I need to educate from the beginning. If you enter the lab, what are the safety issues? What are the things you should do and you are not supposed to do? So please let us pick it from that angle. And in so doing, together, we will make our lab. It's unfortunate. There are so many things that we've done continuously. And as I said, familiarity is part of the problems. The people, we are so familiar with the risk, because in African gems, and so the change doesn't matter. But as I always say, the last time I was asking somebody, lab people, for some years now, you realize that a lot of us, young as we are, then we are struck with death and all of that. We haven't really assessed what is causing some of these things. At the time that we are supposed to enjoy, then you realize that we are getting diseases that are not, you are being exposed to all of these things, but because it is a gradual killer, we are not seeing it. So let's take the situation as an individual issue before we push it to somebody else. That is what I will say for now. Thank you.
All right, Doc. Dr. JC, I just wanted to add a small thing.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Gifty.
Yes, sir.
I think I lost track with you. Are you the one I saw at Central Lab 3 days ago?
No, please. It's
At
a long time I
Microbe?
came to. No. It's a long time I came to Central Lab.
That's okay. All right. So I'll check up.
Is that Dr. Kwachi talking?
Yes.
That's right.
I think I have to come and look for you so that you will help me to do a lot of work in the lab.
I'll rather come to you.
That will be fine. I'll be there. By Thursday, I'll be in the lab. You can come. The energy is there. We can work together for
That's
the change.
great. That's great. I'll come. Yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
Francis, you are lucky to have the director of public health visiting. She's coming to declare the strike for you. So, but on a more serious note, I think one thing, somebody is putting it over here. Please, a lab without eating place. Ouch. You see, we tend to use some of these excuses to put ourselves in harm's way. Yes, you don't have, already we know the structures are not there. The lab itself, as Dr. Gifty described one of them yesterday, is like her palms. So if you even were to do the work, it's not having available space. How much more the eatery? But that does not give us excuse to eat in the lab. I visited a lab and got into the freezer that is expected to be keeping frozen plasma. And you can't imagine. Yes, as much as some of the things are going out there, we are in the public space. How can you keep things like, they say, when I saw it and I asked them, they say, Agbelema. Condo. So you see, some of the things we may not be able to say much of it. Maybe on the Zoom here, we would have been fine. But remember, we are recording on YouTube. It's a call to us that, yes, you don't have an eatery in the lab, but please, it's not a justification for you to eat just by the places you are working to expose yourself to the risk available. So please, let's not give excuses as much as possible and make sure we do things in accordance with the policies, the structures, which are there to protect us and our families. That is the key thing and primary thing. It's not for the hospital's administrator. It's for you, so that you don't go down with some unknown diseases. And after 1 year, the service will say that they will pay you half your salary. After 6 months, that's it. So by 2 years' time, that kind of voluntary pension, because on health grounds, you are supposed to be home. I don't think we have to take that risk.
So, Dr. DJSP, sorry,
Yes.
DJC. Yes, on this, the lab's not having an eating place. Can I please suggest that, like you said, I like your submission. Can our timetable or our schedules be made in such a way that we will go out and eat there? Surprisingly, the places we buy our food, they have sitting places, but we'll pick the food from there and bring it to where we don't have space. So please, let's cultivate the culture such that one is testing, someone can go and eat. When he finishes, even that break of outside the lab, it refreshes you. It is good when you have it, but when you don't have, I am begging, don't let us use it as an excuse, as Dr. DJC has said, so that we continue to perpetuate this unsafe practices. And as he said, it is us. So the first is us, our families, then the communities. Thank you.
Okay. You enter a lab, and if you have good smell, you can know that this one is not coming from the stool sample. It's like some wache and gobe mixed together. Please, let's protect ourselves. I can see Kole Daniel Tete. Do you have your hand up? Kole Daniel Tete.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Please ask your question or bring your suggestion. Yeah.
Okay. So mine is a question. So, Doc, please, I want to find out, in a situation that you have done your risk assessment, and now, of course, we all know from the presentation, understand risk cannot be eliminated. In a situation that it cannot also be, there will be no substitution. Example, citing the facilities you say you went around, the new one they are building, realize that the working space, the engineering control is not there for risks to be minimized or reduced or mitigated. In such situation, what then do you do? What do we do? What amount of risks should be accepted? I think if I should put my question this way, that is okay with this, we are going to go with it. Despite all the controls in place, there's nothing that can be done. I don't know if my question is clear.
Yes, it's very clear. So the question I will also ask, if I should visit the lab again and ask them whether they did any assessment, it is a no. Meanwhile, they are doing all sorts of tests there, almost everything, even including COVID. They were doing COVID there at the time I went there. What kind of assessment did they do? You know, sometimes we are quick to say that, oh, if I say I won't test, my superiors will not be happy. But do you have any document to prove that because of A, B, C, D, and because you did this together as a team, and not someone sitting somewhere and doing it alone, and so then they victimize you, it becomes okay to say you cannot do A, B, C, D. If they want you to do 1, 2, 3, These are the things that they can put in place to reduce the risk for you to do that test. I always would use TB. You are doing TB microscopy. It is staining. The organism would die. But if the same space, you don't have a safety cabinet, they say come and do cultures. Then you say, oh, because you haven't assessed the risks, even the volume of work you do, sometimes the volume is not too much, maybe 1 or 2. So you say, okay, it's fine. Sometimes the space, the methods you are using is generating so much aerosol. And I like the contribution that came from my other friend, I've forgotten his name, when he added the methods. Can you change the method to suit how the space of your lab is? Or because everybody is doing COVID and is generating funds, we want money, so let me also go in for the RDTs and do, forgetting that your space and where you even collect sample is a problem. We can stop some of the tests only when we have done a proper assessment and I've put in documents and I've forwarded it to the right place where you can be tracked. But with your mouth alone, telling your medsup that I won't do this work, I won't do that work, because you haven't done anything. So I'm pleading, once we all contribute to start working like that, then our leaders will take us serious. Then they know that we know what we are about. So they will be looking for more space for you. They want to generate money. You say, good, I can generate money, but this is the risk that is coming for this particular test. If you can get me 1, 2, 3, 4, it will reduce the risk that would come to me. So I will do it. In the same way, you go to some of the rooms that they are using for other processes. It is so big enough that they don't even need those rooms. With time, when they realize that you are not doing what they want and the money generation, you are the money generating agency there, they will start looking for a bigger place for you, giving you the necessary safety issues. But it's because we accept some of these. When I say it and I go to the other regions, they tell me that what you are. But it is about time that we start practicing what we say. And it is not by mouth. Documentation. Lab for yem petro. Ye pekasa by yem petro. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boatin. And I think it's ended quite well with this last statement. We all have to be involved. Basic and fundamental. I remember we've described that one of the things to do as part of the QAs is just even good documentation practice. Documenting personnel records, keeping even appointment letters, job descriptions, and the qualifications of people, CV and other staff, and even the PIN, the requirement of our license to practice. Many of us are not doing it. Many of us are not keeping it in the labs. And this is a basic thing that we can easily file. And when somebody doesn't have it, you can tell the HR why this person doesn't have it and that person cannot be in the lab. It's basic and fundamental. That does not need anybody, just a small, simple file. But we are not doing it. You understand? So I think that we all have to be involved in some of the things that we ask for and make sure that we are putting in place the requirements to protect ourselves, to protect our turf, and make sure that we get what is expected of us. So I can see Seidu Ajewa, your hand is up. Would you want to talk, Teresa? If not, Darren.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. DJC, and thank you, Boss Barton. I want to make a little contribution to the presentation so far. First, I want to touch on the question asked by Dr. Enchikwachi Francis with respect to the administrative aspect where he thinks leadership should take the key role. for most of us practicing quality management system, one of the key laboratory signages that you will see in the lab has to do with don't be the weakest link in the quality chain. When Dr. Boateng was making her presentation, if you look at the advantages and disadvantages of the control measures under the administrative, we will see that because mainly the administrative has to do with primarily dealing with human factor, it becomes very difficult for it to be effectively implemented in the event where there is no authoritative approach or structure with respect to the administrative control. That is why we are all hammering that when it comes to safety, it's the responsibility of everybody in the lab there. From our introductory training yesterday, we realized that biosafety and biosecurity mainly have to do with, one, protecting yourself as a scientist, protecting your fellow colleagues, you are protecting the sample that you work in on it, and last but not the least, you are protecting the environment. So with respect to the hierarchy of controls, we are not automatically mandated just to pick one control measure. We are advised to complement the control measures that are applicable based on the laboratory that you find yourself. More often than not, when we talk about engineering controls, our mind goes to the biosafety cabinets that we have in the lab. However, for even having the biosafety cabinet, if you don't have yearly certification of the biosafety cabinet, invariably, that level of engineering control as far as protection is concerned, we are not getting that one. For most of our labs that are doing TB, we are aware that we have the glove box that is helping us. And even the GeneXpert machine that we use on, there is some form of engineering control to be able to make sure that you protect yourself. Even the reagent that you are using to lyse it gives you the substitution or inactivation of the agents that we are talking about. So for the control measures, we are advised to employ any one of them or work together for us to be able to achieve that needed success that we derive as far as safety is concerned. Now, for eating in the labs and basic other things, I think we don't really need leadership to be able to do that. There are basic, simple things that not from just this training alone, but then in our quality management system aspect there, we have gotten all this information. So it's for us to be able to start doing the basic things. The first basic thing that I want to talk on has to do with the workbench that we work on. As lab professionals, there's a need for us to have a clean area of our workbench where we do our documentation, and in quotes, a dirty area where we do our test and everything. Starting from this, and most of the things that we'll be able to talk will keep our lab safe. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Darren, and very grateful for that. The point is that I can see Margaret Owusu on YouTube is mentioning the issue of eating in the lab. We don't have lab without eating place or room or changing room. Where should the lab staff eat? I think Dr. Gifty mentioned this, that where we bought the food, as much as possible, if you have a well-maintained place over there, you can quickly, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, finish your food before you get back into the lab. It's not appropriate. At times when you are with visitors who enter into a laboratory and you can smell food all over. You yourself, the person eating, having the food, you are not comfortable to let people see you with food there. So that alone should tell us that we should find ways and means, as we keep advocating for these things to be put in place, let's not find excuses to put ourselves in harm's way. I think that's what Dr. Gifty had said, and a lot have also put those things. Can you put on gloves when doing microscopy? Since putting on those things will minimize risk. This is something the facility will have to decide. And if you are to use gloves on your microscopes, everybody should know so that all protect yourself against it. If you are having only one microscope and is used for so many other things, you may want to decide, when do we do microscopy on this? After that, do we sanitize? You have to do all these things through your risk assessment so that you arrive at a decision that you expect everybody to follow. And that will help each and every one. But as much as possible, if you have the capacity, get dedicated microscopes for most of the activities so that you don't have to be changing rules. Use gloves, don't use gloves when one person is on duty or the other. All right. So, Dr. Gifty, I don't know if you have any. We don't have questions. We don't have things for us to look at. Do you have your final words? And Dr. Kwashi, I guess you are around, yes, so that I can take over.
All right, thank you. I think there's a hand up. Teresa.
Yeah, I called her several times, but she couldn't speak. Said Wajewa Teresa before Daron.
Okay.
So
All right.
I think the AIs will have to put tiredness in the hands we raise so that people can feel it when their hands are left up.
All right. Maybe we will leave that to you for you to do, to code for it.
Yeah, people can raise hands for hours and tell you the old hand. All right, so please take over.
Because it's a sign of attendance.
Okay, I see.
All right. All right. So, Dr. Watim, we are grateful for being with us. We know tomorrow you still share your time with us. Teresa, continue.
Yeah, okay. Good evening. Thank you so much for the permission granted. I think it's one thing I want to share with my colleagues on this platform or this program. Our colleagues working without gloves, we those are in the rural areas, it is something that is disturbing us because you complain of no gloves and you're in charge or the nurses will tell you that your colleague even in the sub-district is working without gloves. So this is what I want to tell at least my colleagues on this program, that they should try their best and also do what is right so that at least to cover some of us, because without gloves, me per se, I can't work. But when it comes to sort of the when you come to if you are to complain, then they'll use your colleagues to compare you. And at the end, you see that you become the bad person among your colleagues in that district. So I want to put this across to plead on my colleagues, those like working without gloves, to put it on practice. Thank you so much.
Okay, Teresa, before the GS takes over, what I will say is that you believed because somebody told you your colleagues in the district are working without gloves, so you accepted to also do same. No. Know that as you don't want to, so your other colleagues also don't want to. So don't let somebody, there is a saying that nobody can make you feel inferior without your consent. So somebody can tell me my colleague in the sub-district is working without, so you to do that. Go to the ward. Do they even change bed sheets, bed coverings without gloves? So if they won't do that, why do they expect you to work without gloves? So please don't accept some of these things when people put it at you. It's a strategy that people want to make you feel inferior. If they can do it, come and do the work. But make sure you protect yourself. That is important. You understand? So please. But then you should also know you've done your good inventories. You knew when your gloves were running out. You requested a good time. You have documentation to show that you did a good time request. So that it's not like when you are working and it finishes, then you want to walk to the stores, there is no gloves, and you want the patient to suffer. So let's make sure while we are sticking to these principles, we also go through the processes and make sure everybody is covered. Because the stores manager will not be a magician to give you gloves the very moment yours run out, when you didn't give prior notice, knowing when your stock will run out. So all these things must be put in place before you can start making noise. Else somebody will come back and say that you caused it. So please, it's a holistic picture when it comes to quality management systems. Let's not think about ourselves alone, but it's a holistic process. That's what I was. So yes, take over.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Dejesi, let me add this before JS takes over. I think was it, yes, beginning of this year when we were doing Biorisk training, this thing came out and I thought it was very far away in the hinterlands, but surprisingly somebody in Greater Accra also raised the same issue where they work without gloves. So I was asking the person how possible, because for me it doesn't even cross my mind. If you say reagents are finished and then you want me to do another test, it makes sense. But gloves, that in this part of our world, that infections and emerging diseases are coming. So I can't. So it is true of what she's saying, because that person told me point blank, and it wasn't like one-on-one. It was to the whole session. That's when you request for gloves, they say there's no gloves. So for him, you will use their hands to. I'm like, I can't get it. So I think it is high time that colleagues, this is nobody can sack you for you not working because there's no gloves. I gave you some of these things we cannot, but like Dr. DJC said, do we have our inventory in place? What is your minimum stock? When did you first start putting in that you needed gloves? When did it get finished? When they come and they are tracking, can they also make or get it that you haven't wasted it? That is also even a wastage. How are you going to even define it? It is difficult. But then sometimes we also get it and then we take some home and things like that. So when you have done all that you are supposed to do, please don't work when there is no gloves. This one, I can't understand. In this, our age, with the education we have, with all the trainings that our leaders are helping us to get, then we say that there's no gloves, then the nurse is telling you, colleagues, it is not me. So please, Dr. DJC, I don't know how this one, we are going to trumpet it for everybody to know that it is a no-go area. As I said, it's familiarity.
Last time you home.
I'm just wondering how I will hold a stool sample and emulsify and put drops on slide, cover slip it, and go and hold under the mic without gloves. Hey, please, Samuel, please. Please watch up your mic. Then you go and cover slip and observe the stool, pick cysto, trichuris, and the rest, and report with your pen. Go back home with that same pen in your bag. Your child asks for pen to do the homework. You give him that same pen. The next minute, you see the child with the pen in the mouth. That sick person in the hospital, you brought the shit home, and your child has put it in the mouth. If you want to work without gloves, that's your business. But let's put all the measures in place. And when you don't have it, at least for gloves, dear, nobody will kill you if you can't observe sputum, stool samples, and this without gloves. It's a basic thing, and we have come too far to say that you want to work without gloves. That is too risky. Too risky for me to say that people can do it. But we will keep hammering and addressing that. Let's make sure our requests, our inventories, and everything, and you have memo to cover. Because when it comes to legal issues and they want to talk about negligence, if you don't have anything to suggest you requested about a month ago, 2 weeks ago, and you want a patient to suffer, if there is any mortality, they may push it on you that because you didn't work, the person died. At that point, you may not get documents to cover yourself. The association may come in, but probably they may not be able to protect you. Let's cover our thefts and ourselves so that even when legal issues are raised, we will be protected because we documented. If it's not written, it's not done. These are basic things that I don't expect anybody to falter when it comes to some of these things and matters of negative. But we will keep hammering it and let people know about it. Thank you, Dr. Gifty. Dr. Kwashi, please take over and kindly close the session if there is no further questions.
All right. So thank you very much, Dr. Boateng, Dr. DJC, Dr. Iku, and the rest of the team behind the scenes. And so, Dr. Boateng, we are grateful for your time shared with us and your knowledge. We'll be expecting you tomorrow, same time, for 4 p.m. Same time tomorrow. And so we also encourage our members to go subscribe and share the Gamls TV on YouTube with others. Let's also ensure that we register for the program. The daily attendance are important. Thank you very much and wish you a good evening. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Good evening.